Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to have a little look at one of the most famous pieces of music written by Mozart in order to explore how he manages to achieve something so beautiful through simplicity. After all, many composers or artists in general go about being as complex and as deep as possible in order to say something profound. Here's Mozart kind of taking the opposite approach, really, saying something absolutely beautiful and memorable that people want to engage with time and time again, but in many ways in the simplest possible terms. So it's his Sonata in C, K545, and we're just going to have a look at the first movement. So here's a flavour of it. It's a piece that will be very familiar to many people. That's how it begins, and indeed that's the first subject. So first of all, let's think about the structure of this work. Something that was absolutely prevalent in the classical period was the use of sonata form. So briefly, what's sonata form? It's got three sections: an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation. There may be an introduction or may not be an introduction. In this case, there isn't. Mozart just gets going with his first theme. And in the exposition, you have two themes, or two subjects as they're sometimes called. And the idea is that the first subject, the first theme, is in the tonic key. And then you have a second theme or a second subject that's often in the dominant key. And then you have that whole exposition repeated. Then you have a development section where the composer takes ideas from the exposition, from that first and second subject, develops them in various ways and goes through various keys. And then in the recapitulation, we come back and we do the first and the second subjects again from the exposition, but this time we have them both in the tonic key. There's a kind of reason for that if you think about it. If you had the second subject in the dominant key, like you do in the exposition, then the whole piece is going to end in the wrong key. So you put them both in the tonic key so we all finish in the right key. And there might be a coda at the end just to finish it off. You might have some closing material at the end of the exposition to finish that off as well. So does Mozart follow a standard sonata form? Pretty much so. The bit we just got to, which is down here, is the end of the first subject. So, here's your first subject theme. This is the melody, and it's in the tonic key. A couple of phrases there, kind of balancing each other. And then he has this sort of contrasting thing of the scale runs. Off a bit and comes back, and so we get to the cadence, dum, pom. And when you get to this point, he's actually finished on the dominant chord. So it's a G major chord. We're still in C major, but it's a dominant chord. And then he has this kind of sort of little linking bar. And then we have what's called the second subject, and this is in the dominant key, G major. Sequence. And then he carries on. So there's the second subject. Okay, well, you can see when we go on to the next page that we come to the end of the exposition. You can always spot the end of the exposition because it's marked by those repeat signs. So there's a fairly emphatic cadence there, isn't there, in the dominant key in G major. Okay, now what happens next on these lines here is that this is the development section. Now, it's quite a short development section. Sometimes development sections are quite a bit longer than this. So Mozart's got quite a short one, so that's quite simple. And he goes through various keys, which is what we said he might do. So we start in G minor. So we've been in G major, he goes to G minor, takes that idea. You can see where it's come from because that idea is something we've heard at the end of the exposition. So there it is in G minor. That's the bit I've just played that comes there. Then he does the same thing an octave lower. Couldn't be simpler. And then he sets about those scale runs. Well, we heard some scale runs, didn't we, at the end of the first subject. So possibly that's where this has come from. And then it's answered in the right hand. Now we're going to sort of D minor. There's your D minor established by the time we get to this point. And then he takes this idea again, which is the one that he was developing back there. Now we get it in D minor. Kind of fairly simple stuff. It's called 1, 5, 7, 1, down the octave, 1, 5, 7, 1. And back with the scale runs again that we talked about from up here. So here we go again in the right hand. Answered in the left hand. Going to the key of A minor. Answered in the left hand. Right hand. You see what's happening now? This is a sequence, but going through C major. Just exchanging between the hands. A minor. And then we're thinking, well, hello, what's this? And then we're doing something interesting because this is kind of coming now to the end of this development section. And then when we get here, he comes back to the first subject. So this is where the recapitulation begins. But hang on a moment. There's something wrong because we said when you come to the recapitulation, you have the first subject and the second subject both in the tonic key. So this should be in C major. But Mozart's made one little change, and this is the part of the genius of Mozart, of course. You know, how do we do something that's very dinky and simple and beautiful, but, you know, follows sonata form beautifully, but then we just have one little twist in the tail. And this is it. He puts this in F major, in the subdominant key. Now, the question is, why does he do that? Well, the second subject actually comes in the tonic key in C major. So if you think about it, F major is a fifth below C major. So if he puts the first subject in F major and then preserves the idea of modulating to the dominant, which is what he did in the exposition. Yeah, you with me so far? So in the exposition, we started in C major for the first subject. We went up to its dominant, G major, for the second subject. So now what we're doing is we're starting in F major and we're going to its dominant, which is C major, which of course brings us back to the home key of C major. So this is a break with the convention of sonata form, but actually it's a very neat solution, isn't it? You go into the subdominant key so that when you go to its dominant, you're back in the home key again. So it's a rather kind of genius idea, isn't it? And how does he get into F major? Well, back here we said we were in A minor, didn't we? Well, he then has a chord of B flat major. Well, B flat major in relation to A minor, B flat major is a Neapolitan chord. So the Neapolitan chord is a major chord built on the flattened supertonic, the flattened second degree of the scale, and it's usually used in first inversion. So we're in A minor, the second degree of the scale is B, so lower it is B flat, put a major chord on B flat, we get B flat, D, F, put it in first inversion, you've got D in the bass. That's exactly what happens here. So you're in A minor, you use the Neapolitan of A minor. Well, of course, this Neapolitan is also chord 4 in first inversion in the key of F. So you can then go chord 5, 7 in F. and you're all set for the start of the recapitulation, but with the first subject in F major. It works beautifully, doesn't it? There's a real simplicity about it, but actually it's damn clever, isn't it? Okay, so then he carries on in F major, and we carry on doing that for a while. And then it gets sort of quite interesting because we're in F major for quite a long stretch, but he comes to a cadence at the end of the first subject where you think, oh, what's happened here with the key? Because it looks like we might be heading for G major, because we've got a G major chord there. But of course, the G major chord here is chord 5 in C major. Then he carries on, but cleverly using an F sharp. So you're thinking, oh, sounds like G major. But then it becomes F natural. And here comes the second subject in C major. So this is all very familiar, isn't it? And then, of course, the whole thing kind of comes to a final line, cadence in C major with a kind of grand finale. And that's the end of the movement. So the simplicity of the structure, you know, it's a very clear sonata form, but it has a little twist in the tail. And this is one of the genius things of Mozart, that little twist in the tail. Okay, let's look at one or two other things briefly. We briefly touched on what's happening melodically. A 2-bar phrase at the beginning. Very simple construction, isn't it? Well, because what's this? The first 3 notes, just a tonic chord spelt out. Then we go to note that belongs to a dominant chord, and then we come back to a tonic. Couldn't be simpler. With harmony, just as simple. 1, dominant 7th, happens to be in its second inversion, but dominant 7th, back to chord 1. Answering phrase, same rhythm to start with, and then slightly altered at the end. So you can see how these two phrases balance each other. The second is a kind of answer to the first. And chords, well, there's a chord 4, second inversion, back to chord 1, chord 5, first inversion, back to chord 1. So it's all very straightforward primary chords being used there. A touch of a tonic pedal point running through, not quite there, but back here as well, not there, sort of back there. So you see these tonics going in the left hand, which is partly why this chord 4 is in second inversion. There's a kind of 6-4-5-3 progression there, but we're preserving this C in the bass, D, back to C, 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 down to B, back to C. So even when it moves away from C, you see the C is the kind of center point, isn't it? C, D, C, B, C. So it's really kind of establishing that C major tonality. Couldn't be simpler. 2-part texture. Couldn't be simpler. The left hand using a typically classical Alberti bass. Bottom, top, middle, top, bottom, top, middle, top. That's how an Alberti bass goes. You just spell out a chord in that way. And after these first 4 bars, well, time for a bit of contrast. How does he do it? With this very simple idea we talked about of scale runs. You go up 1, come down, do this whole thing a note lower. Do the whole thing a note lower. And again, a note lower. And a note lower. But this time you go on and extend it in some way into the cadence. And then a kind of defined staccato just to say we're coming to a structural point, the end of the first subject. So you see the melodic construction is very simple, isn't it? Look at the left hand. You know, plenty of rest here just to let air into the texture, and very simple kind of chordal stuff going on. And notice how that tonic is still around. C, B, C. So we talked about the C's in the first bit there. Now we've got C's again going on here, haven't we? So that's still there. And then, a little bit of movement from there when we just hint at another key briefly, because what he does here is to use chord 2, D minor, but goes up the scale of D melodic minor. So you get the C sharp. So you're wondering if it's going to modulate, but it doesn't really. It's just kind of 2 in C major. Onto chord 4. And then that F sharp in the left hand that helps shift us into the G major. But then he's just alternating a G major and a C major chord to take us there. And on it goes. So you see the simplicity of the construction, the use of the sonata form that we focused on. You see the simplicity of melodic design. You see the simplicity of the texture. You see things like this Alberti thing being used. You see scale runs being used in sequence. It's all very simple at one level, but what's interesting is how there were other composers of the classical period who were perfectly able to write a simple piece, but in many cases simple equals boring. So you listen to it or you play it and you think, well, it's all very dinky, but actually doesn't do anything, does it? Whereas this is kind of loaded with that Mozartian magic that enables him to produce something of simplicity, but also something of great beauty and something of depth. One or two clever touches like that Neapolitan chord we talked about, like the first subject returning in the wrong key at the beginning of the recapitulation. One or two other little surprises. Little rhythmic touches, like, down here you suddenly see this kind of Lombardic rhythm. There's just little touches that do things you're not entirely expecting. But you've only got to look at the page to see that all the simplicity we've talked about is basically maintained throughout the movement. Nothing complicated in the harmonic language, but one or two little twists and turns going on. Just very clever and absolutely beautiful in its simplicity. So I'm sure it's a piece, as I say, that many people will know, but hopefully it will just enhance your appreciation of the piece. And if you don't know it, well, it's certainly one of the Mozart sonatas that's well worth engaging with. And there are many other superb Mozart sonatas besides. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you might like to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Have a click on Maestros, for example, and you'll find that we've got an international musical community there run by Music Matters, and there are 3 levels of engagement. They're not levels that are related to ability in any way at all. You can be an absolute beginner, or you can have been doing this all your life. Level 1 comes with a few perks, emojis, fun things like that, but it's a support level. It's just requiring a very small financial contribution just to help us really to keep this whole thing going. As you can imagine, the number of videos that we're trying to put out on the channel every week takes a lot of time, effort, finance. So that would really help support us. So we'd be really grateful for any help you could give us there. If you want to engage at a deeper level, well, level 2 is there. And for level 2, there are obviously increased benefits, including access to a monthly live stream, where we can go into much more detail in the sort of way that this video gives you a taster, if you like, but it's a different kind of experience. We've got an hour to work together, so I'll make a major teaching input there. We run a live chat through the whole thing, so you can ask your questions as we're going. If there's something I say you're not sure about, you can ask the question. If you want to make a comment, that's fine. It's all there for us to share together. So that's a great kind of sharing, learning experience together. And people often tell us how marvelous it is that they feel part of something that's bigger than the lonely trail that they sometimes feel they're on, and to realize that other people are in the same place. If you want to go a step further, level 3 gives you access to discounts on courses, and also access to a further live stream every month. And in this live stream, you can make submissions. So you can hand in your own composition, for example, or a piece of harmony, something you're working on, or a recorded performance that you've made. And I'll offer you one-to-one feedback on that. Again, the live chat's running. We can talk about things as we go. You can hear feedback from other people as well. And it's very supportive, as I say. And people often say, that's really interesting that this person struggled with that because I've struggled with that for years, and now I see how you've managed to help them fix it, and that will help me fix it. So that's great. Or people saying, I've never written a guitar piece before, but now we've had that guitar piece, I'm going to try writing it. I've learned how to do it. So it's wonderful. And again, interactive, share whatever views you want to. And in these live streams, I'm trying to be as responsive as possible to topics that people want to cover. So if there's something you want to know about, if you're a Maestro member, you just let us know and we'll try and include it in our program. Back on the homepage of the website, you can also click on courses. That will give you access to our many courses, all designed to empower the all-round musician. So if you want to do an A to Z course in theory, oral training, oral dictation, orchestration, analysis, writing harmony, it's all there. So dip in there and see what there might be for you and enjoy.